What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill. I'm a Black American from Louisiana, and I'm recording this video on March 19th, 2025 in Budapest, Hungary, where I am currently enrolled in university studying sociology. And today I am reviewing a book that I've been meaning to read for a long time, and this is The Autobiography of Angela Davis. Now, I said before that I'm from Louisiana. I was actually born in Alabama. So this is a story of a famous Alabamian who did good, who changed the world, and continues to advocate for the oppressed people of the earth, right? Angela Davis is a Marxist historian. She is a Marxist critical thinker, a Marxist feminist, a Marxist activist from the United States of America, who in the 1970s was charged with helping lead a conspiracy that resulted in the death of a judge, members of a jury who were trying to convict the Soledad brothers. Basically, these were political prisoners in California who were trying to fight for their freedom, and the guns that were used in the attack on the courthouse that killed the judge and a few of the members of the jury and the assailants themselves were owned by Angela Davis, as the prosecution said. Angela Davis was eventually found not guilty of those charges, and she continued to advocate for people who were held behind bars unjustly for political reasons, right? And this book here, right, tells a lot about her story. It's very dense. It's about 400 pages or so, and I literally just finished it about an hour ago today. I've been reading this book for the past 2 weeks, and there's a lot in Angela Davis's story that resonates with me. Firstly, you know, she's from Alabama. I'm from Huntsville. She was born in Birmingham, and she grew up in a place called Dynamite Hill. And in Dynamite Hill, her family was one of the first black families to move in there, in this formerly all-white neighborhood. And the people called this place Dynamite Hill because the white folks would try to bomb the houses of the black people that were moving into the neighborhood. That was a very moving part of her story, right? Basically, this book, and I have the third edition, I believe, because in this book that I have, we have the preface to the first edition, which came out in 1974, the second edition in 88, and the third edition in 2021. So I believe this is the 2021 third edition that I read. And this book is broken down not into chapters, but essentially into 6 parts. Part 1 is Nets, where she talks about being underground on the run from the police. Eventually, she is caught and thrown into the prison system. And there's an extradition from New York to California where she is caught and where she is meant to be tried for the crimes that they accused her of. And, you know, part 1 for me, it was hard to get into because, like I said in the review that I did for Asada's book, I'm not that interested in like prison stories. I'll keep it absolutely a buck. Like when she's talking about the degrading conditions of being incarcerated in America or held in jail, right? It's not that moving or touching for me. You get what I'm saying? Because I already take it for granted that the prison system in America is unfair, unjust, unclean, dehumanizing, all that sort of stuff, right? But in there, in part 1, she still relays a lot of her worldview, her consciousness, the reason why we need to fight and advocate to change the prison system and how it affects people that look like us the most, right? Part 2 is Rocks, where she goes more into her life growing up in Alabama. And this part really, really affected me because I love reading autobiographies of anybody in particular because I love to hear people's stories, right? And especially coming of age stories. And as she was talking about her childhood growing up in Alabama and the racism she experienced and how she sort of dealt with the consciousness of growing up black in America in the 1950s and early 1960s, right? It was very moving for me because I love hearing those stories of what it was like to be a child during the peak of Jim Crow, during those radical movements that were happening at the time. You know, Brown versus Board of Education hit in 1954 and stuff like that. And so, Yeah, all these movements and changes and types of life that black people were going through in America at that point in the story were very moving for me. I thought it was funny, when she was talking about, she made it a point to remember, I will never say I want to be white. And I remember her in this book, I believe in part 2 saying that, she got teased because she was light skinned and stuff like that. And so, that really hurt her, people thinking that she wanted to be white or pass as white and stuff like that. So part 2, Rocks, was dope. Part 3, Waters, moved me as well. I believe part 3 is where she talks about her decision of whether to go to like this, university, I believe it was Fisk in Tennessee, or to go up to New York City, where she had some family, and also attend a private school in New York, right, where she would be one of the few black kids. And she decided to go to New York to like get out of the South and get herself out of that condition and expand her opportunities. So that was very moving for me and touching. And throughout the book, Angela always talks about her dedication to like education, how she loved to read, how she loved to like, just learn about all sorts of things and be around different people, and didn't let anybody try to alienate her from her blackness, right? So part 3 was dope too as well. Part 4, Flames, is probably the longest part of the book. It's over 100 pages. I would say it could be a book in and of itself. And part 4, Flames, talks about her going to study abroad, which threw me out of the loop because, once again, I've heard of Angela Davis before reading this book. I've admired Angela Davis from what I've heard her say in speeches and stuff that I've caught like on YouTube and stuff like that. And she's mentioned and revered by all the other figures that I look up to, right, in contemporary black thought and radical thought as well. But, I didn't know much about her story. And Angela Davis went to go study in Europe. And here I am, a black person from the South, studying in Europe as well, right? And what does that mean to be a black person abroad in a place where, number one, white supremacy came from, and secondly, where people are so removed from what we go through as black folks in America, right? She talks about being in Europe, I believe in Flames, part 4, about being in Europe at the time the bombing of those little girls happened in Birmingham, Alabama, at that church where those 3 black girls were killed by a white supremacist terrorist, right? And I believe she was either in Germany or France at the time. She was surrounded by white people, but she didn't want to be comforted or consoled by them because they didn't understand really what she was going through, right? And I've had several experiences like that. Like I was abroad in Tunisia, I was abroad in Serbia, I was abroad somewhere when I heard about a terrorist attack that happened to black folks, right? I'll never forget. I was in Turkey when I heard about the shooting at the Buffalo supermarket done by Peyton Gentrin, when 10 random black people were murdered by a white supremacist terrorist, and I really had nobody to talk to or relate to that experience of what it feels like to see that sort of terrorism affect your people in America. Pardon the construction outside. So that's part 4, Flames. There's a lot to talk about in part 4, Flames, as well. She talks about studying in Europe and taking language courses very seriously, like studying German so that she could continue studying philosophy from philosophers like Adorno, who was like probably one of the most important 20th century philosophers, right? She studied right under him as well. Her dedication also to the struggle, like she had this tear in her heart between, should I stay in Europe and continue my education or get back in America and continue the fight as well? So that's going through her mind. Also in Flames, she comes back to America after studying sometime in Europe, begins studying in California, but also as going back and forth about which movement, which group does she want to join, right? Does she want to join the Communist Party? Does she want to join the Panthers? Does she want to join the US organization by Karenga? You get what I'm saying? So she goes back and forth, and there is a bit of political evolution in this book and social evolution, but mostly Angela Davis is a committed communist in this book. And possibly one of my criticisms of this book, and I started to notice this in the part Flames, part 4, is that, this book is written somewhat as communist propaganda. And I mean that in a sincere way as a communist myself, right? But this is written to inspire other communists and to motivate people to understand the communist and Marxian worldview, right? She is a committed revolutionary. And so every paragraph that could be considered wavering or doubt is marked out. And so those paragraphs are marked out, and instead what is given to us is a type of perspective that is forefront and bold and unrepentant and how can I say this, not conciliatory to anything critical of the communist cause, right? In the book, Part 4, Flames, as she debates going back and forth with the Black Panthers' radical black nationalism, right? Or the Karenga's cultural revolutionary type of thought, right? She critiques those worldviews and says essentially like, we cannot have black liberation until we have a target on capitalism and a critique of capitalism. And so that's that, right? And so we also have to remember, like, when she wrote this book, and she says this at the very end in the acknowledgement section, that Fidel Castro himself invited her to come to Cuba to work on this manuscript, for months at a time for free. Like, Fidel Castro put her up somewhere in a cabana in Havana and had her pounding away at a typewriter. So shout out to Angela for that, right? But speaking of Cuba, also Part 4 in Flames, she talks about her trips to Cuba and going out there with the people, like cutting sugarcane and talking to the people about race and racism and their fight against capitalism. And she ends with the declaration that only socialism can fight against white supremacy. Something I somewhat agree with. There's that there. But yeah, Part 4 Flames has a lot in there. She also talks about how she first met George Jackson and the Soledad brothers and how they inspired her and how that eventually ended up her getting caught up in their case and charged with her own case of conspiring to help the uprising or the attack on the court system by a man named Jonathan. I forgot his last name, right? But he was one of the Soledad brothers, or he was the brother of George Jackson, Jonathan Jackson, I believe, right? Anyway. So, sorry I'm all over the place, but that's essentially part four, which was a powerful chapter in this book as well. But Part 4 is where I started to get a bit bogged down, right? A bit bogged down with her writing style. Walls is when she goes back to talking about her incarceration. So she's awaiting trial after getting extradited from New York to California to face charges for the conspiracy to kill the people in the court case who were charging the Soledad brothers. And in that section, it's more descriptions of the inhumanity she suffered in the court system, and also the legal wranglings as well. Once again, not very interesting for me. I sort of tuned out at that part a bit, right? And the final part of this book, Part 6, Bridges, is possibly the most celebratory and a good, I would say, bow on this book, right? Because in there she talks about finally, going to court after making bail. She was locked up, and the reason she was able to get out of jail is because the California Supreme Court said that the death penalty is no longer on the table. And she was facing charges that could have got her the death penalty, killed in California. You know what I'm saying? So she beat that because California got rid of that. So she was able to get bail. And then when she finally goes to court, she's a part of her defense team as well. She directly addresses the jury, the judge, everybody in the courthouse. Her team puts up a good legal fight. And eventually they're found not guilty, acquitted on all charges. So she beat the feds. She beat the state. She beat everybody. There's an interesting part in the last part where she believes the FBI was trying to make sure she got a guilty verdict because, while the jury was deliberating, they spread a false rumor that a hijacking of an airplane done by some black militants was somehow related to her. But it turned out those black militants had nothing to do with Angela Davis or her case, right? So, there's a lot of conspiracy in this book against her, right? And it's not unfounded, right? I'm not saying this as Angela just making stuff up, right? So, that's pretty much a good summation of this book. Do I suggest that people read this book? Hell yes. But is it a tough read? Yes. Is it a type of book that you're going to pick up and feel like you know everything about Angela Davis? No, right? And I feel like I would rather pick up an autobiography where somebody's admitting some hard truths about themselves, which is sort of like why I liked Assata more. I'll be honest. I like Assata Shakur's autobiography more than I like Angela Davis's, because Angela Davis only sends hints about her, romantic relationships, right? Angela Davis only sends hints about maybe some of her doubts she had about, socialism or communism or Cuba or something like that, or none at all. You get what I'm saying? I do think she is honest completely about her worldview, but I feel like this book is written more as an agenda piece rather than it is a revelatory piece. This is not the type of book written by somebody who wants to just let their soul out, right? This is a book from somebody who is in a fight, who is in a battle, right? Who is trying to use these words, these pages, to also further the goal and agenda, which I wholeheartedly agree with, of, abolishing a corrupt criminal justice system, of actually having peace, justice, and equality for all oppressed people, for getting rid of white supremacy and anti-blackness, for changing or outright abolishing the most wicked parts of capitalism, right? All of those things I agree with Angela with. So I'm not critiquing this book for just being propaganda. I'm saying this is more of a propaganda piece than it is Assata's book, which is more poetic, which is more loose in its language, which is more critical of the self. That's what I'm saying. Like, this book is very typewriter. This book is very, hammered out for a specific message, for a specific audience, and meant to embolden them and empower them and maybe influence others who don't see her worldview. You get what I'm saying? Assata's book, and I hate to compare the two because both of them are equally like sisters I love and admire, right? But Assata's book I find to touch me more, to be more memorable, and just in its imagery and its writing, it's just more vivid. And this is more, just like the cover, a very black and white, hardcore, story of a committed revolutionary communist philosopher who is deep in thought and deeply committed to the struggle and willing to give their life for the struggle, right? And by the way, in the book, Angela Davis admits that her father was also a communist, so I think that also, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree as well. So there's a lot more that I could say about this book. I mean, come on, like 400 pages of somebody's life story could not be summed up in only an 18, 20-minute video about it. But I highly suggest people pick up this book, read it, critique it for yourself, give your own spin on it. You get what I'm saying? Maybe I'll revisit this book in the future, right? I plan on reading more of Davis's works, right? Because she has several books out, and yeah, I would love to hear what other people have to say about Angela Davis's book. Tell me what you think about this review. Let me know if you've read it. Let me know if you plan on reading it, and let me know what you think I should be reading next. I have some other things on the agenda that I plan on reading. I plan on reading some straight up Martin Luther King. I plan on reading some straight up Martin Luther King next. I have a big book of Martin Luther King's interviews and short segments of his text and stuff like that. Book is about 500 pages, this thick like the Bible, so we're going to be checking that out soon. But let me know what you think about Angela Davis, and shout out to everybody who watched. Peace.